So, tonight we're welcoming Jessie Dowling, and she's here to talk about her experience training and riding the Mongol Derby. In August 2023, Jessie competed in the Mongol Derby at over 1,000 kilometers, and it's the longest horse race in the world. It's set across wide open, steep landscape in Mongolia. The pictures are amazing. Jessie's going to talk to us about how the race works and how the local horse owners are all, they own the horses and you have to camp with them and train with them, and it's really quite a journey that she decided to take, and really out of how do you beat burnout. She owned the Fuzzy Udder Creamery, which I absolutely love the name of, in Maine, in Whitefield, Maine. And she was listening to a podcast about a woman that trained people to ride the Mongol Derby. And of course, I would listen to that and think, what a wonderful person that is. Jessie listens, and she sells her business and goes and trains. That's not exactly how it happened, but you did. You looked up this person and you said, I want to do this, because riding the longest uphill over deserts and stuff, horse race is something you wanted to do. So we are in for a treat tonight to hear all about the wonderful inspiration, the perseverance, and what it takes to really just pull something off like this and follow your dreams. I'd also like you to talk about what you're doing now with horses, and welcome to Berwick.
Thank you so much. That was a very kind, generous introduction, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me. Since this is a small crowd, feel free to if you guys have questions, happy to answer them as we go along, since we have a nice intimate group. But I absolutely love, this is my favorite topic to talk about, so I'm excited that you guys are here for the next hour to talk with me about Mongolia and training for endurance races. Just some background, how many of you guys have heard of the Mongol Derby before or have any idea what it is? Oh, cool. Okay, so it is the longest horse race in the world. It's set across the steppe of Mongolia in the traditional nomadic herding landscape. So there are still 300 and some odd thousand families that still live a nomadic lifestyle in Mongolia. And the race kind of recreates Genghis Khan's ancient postal route. So there was a time when the Mongolian Empire spanned from China to the Danube River. And during that time period, horses were the way that people got around. I think the stirrup was invented in that region, and horses were first domesticated in Kazakhstan, which is right next door to Mongolia. But in the time of Genghis Khan, they had an ancient postal route, which would be made up of different horse stations that would carry one rider, one leg, and then they'd switch riders, and you could send a message to the other side of the Mongol Empire in a matter of days. So it's kind of an homage to that. This particular race was 29 different horse stations, or urtus, where you would change horses. And it was set up just like an endurance ride in another country, in other countries, where there's a veterinarian at every horse station, and the horses are checked out by the vet. You have to make sure that you don't override them, which means that their heart rate has to come down below 56 beats per minute within half an hour, or you get a time penalty or are disqualified from the race if it happens too many times, because you're riding not just one horse but 29 different horses throughout the race. The race, you're allotted 10 days, but you can finish as fast as you want. It is self-navigated, so you have a GPS coordinate and a handheld GPS that says, hey, this is where we're going to go to this next station, but there's no like go this way or like go around this mountain. You have to decide, choose your own adventure. And there were 43 riders that started in the race in 2023 when I did it. And out of those 43, 25 finished. I came in 13th. I tied with another rider. During the race, 1,500 horses are used. And each horse that is used, the herder who owns the horse is paid for that horse. And the better the horse does, the more the Mongolian is paid for it. So you're using traditional nomadic herding horses. They say they're semi-wild, but what they really mean is that on the steppe, horses roam free 23 hours of the day. They're brought in onto a horse line, which I'll show you in pictures later, and they'll stand tied for a period of time, but for most of their life, they're running free on the steppe. So it looks very wild to people that are used to seeing horses in stables, but it is actually very natural.
Did you have to pay a fee to?
Oh yes, it was quite a fee. Yes, there was a big entry fee. And there are hundreds of Mongolian crew members that put on this race, and herders as well. So each herding family would have about 60 horses, and they would be able to host the horse station because they already had that many horses. And some of them were multiple families kind of cobbling together. There were some desert regions. But I'm going to back up and I'm going to talk about why did I go and how did I get there. So that's going to be the bulk of what I talk about for a little while. Every good adventure has a good fundraiser attached to it, usually. Mine was for two different ones. One was Steppenhoof, which is a group that gives veterinary care to herders out on the Mongolian steppe. It was founded by one of the race directors. There's lots of Mongolian crew members, as well as it's an English company, so there's also English and American folks and Australian folks that work for the equestrianists that put on the Mongol Derby. And then, so they give veterinary care to herders that live way far away from amenities. They also end up giving a lot of first aid to humans as well, because it is so remote out in the steppes of Mongolia. And if you don't know where Mongolia is, it's in between Russia and China in Asia, Central Asia. And then the other one that I fundraised for was called Brave Hearts. And they're the largest equine therapy nonprofit in the country, and they're based outside of Chicago. And I chose them for a reason that will be clear soon. But they have this amazing multi-city ride where they go to big cities like New York or Chicago, and they ride with veterans on this ride called Trail to Zero, and it's a 20-mile ride through major cities where they're drawing attention to suicide prevention in veterans. They also have a huge veteran program in Chicago area, and so it's so big that if you have a veteran that you know that's struggling with PTSD or depression or something that you think that equine therapy could help, they have a fund to be able to bring them to their facility and house them and help them. So it's an amazing organization, and I got a chance to meet them and got to know them. So I fundraised for both of those organizations. And I always start my talk by thanking my family, because if it wasn't for my mom and dad, they supported my horse addiction from a very young age. And I started riding when I was probably 8 years old at the Great Falls Horse Center in Virginia. But if they hadn't supported my love of horses when I was young, there was probably no way I would be where I am today. So I always want to tip my hat to them, and they've always been behind me in every step of the way. As Sharon mentioned, I was the owner of Fuzzy Udder Creamery for about 12, 13 years, and I'd been in the dairy industry making cheese in Maine for 17 years, all in mid-coast Maine. So if you guys haven't heard of Fuzzy Udder, that's okay. This is a little bit on the far reaches of Maine for me. It's exciting to get to visit new places on my little library tour. But I wouldn't have been able to go to Mongolia in the summertime for 6 weeks if I didn't have an amazing crew. So while I was running the creamery, I had amazing staff that were able to hold down the sheep and goat farm, because we were milking sheep and goats and making cheese full season in August and July of 2023. It was a very busy time, so very grateful. And when I came back, just a testament to how well everybody held it down, we were able to win Best in Show in the Maine Cheese Festival that same year. So we didn't really miss a beat, so that was exciting. But my story actually starts in a very somber note. This picture is of two really important people in my life. On the left is Caitlin Hunter. She ran Appleton Creamery in Appleton, Maine. That's where I first learned how to make cheese, and it's where I worked for 5 years. When she was aging out of the cheese industry, a longtime apprentice and worker of hers named Jenny Mae McKenzie, the woman on the right, was slated to take over her farm. And everything was working out pretty well. They were getting into the documents, and she was on the ground working there. and I get a call from Caitlin in the summer of 2021 that Jenny had taken her life. And in that week, because Caitlin had kind of aged out of being able to milk, she wasn't able to milk the goats. And so I had to pick up all the goats on that farm and bring them to my farm. So within 1 week, everyone's life had just changed. And it was the first time I've ever felt the effects of what suicide happens in your community. It just rips a giant hole out and you're left to pick up the pieces. And it left me wondering, like, what do you do? And it made me ask myself a lot of questions about why am I doing what I'm doing? There was another farmer suicide in the same town about 18 months later. So this was a time, it was during the pandemic, and it was a time when we were all asking ourselves big questions about why we do what we do. I was the president of the Maine Cheese Guild at the time, and so all of my free time besides making cheese and running a small cheese business was building the cheese industry in Maine. So I didn't have a lot of time for other things, like never got married, never had a family, I was just working. And during the pandemic, because there weren't events that I was organizing, because everything was kind of shut down, I actually had more time to spend with my horses, because in 2011 I was gifted 2 fillies. So my side project throughout all this time running the creamery was slowly training these 2 mares. That was kind of my hobby. It was something I could kind of pick away with over the years and kind of hone my skills as a horse trainer really slowly over time. But during the pandemic, I had time and my business was doing well enough that I had some money. So I was starting to go to clinics, and I started to find out about things like this podcast that Sharon had mentioned, which is called the Journey On podcast with Bork Schiller. And I was at some clinics in Maine, Chris Lombard Clinic, and I had this feeling that, like, I was supposed to be doing horses and not supposed to be doing cheese. I just had this deep visceral feeling. And so I just kept going down on that and going to more clinics and doing more things with horses, going on more trail rides. And I stumbled upon Bork Schiller's podcast, where Stevie Delahunt gets on and says, I train people to ride the Mongol Derby. And I was like, what? You can be trained to go do that? Are you kidding me? So I was like, I'm just going to sign up. Because I'd heard of the Mongol Derby, but I was like, this is what professionals do. I'm not a professional. I'm a cheesemaker that likes horses on the side. But Stevie said you could go to her boot camp and she'll train you how to do it. So she lived in Oregon, and I was like, cool, I'm going to sign up. And I just started to, like, live the life like I was someone who was going to ride the Mongol Derby. So what would you do? Well, you have to learn about endurance riding, right? Like, I had already started riding my horses on a lot of trails, and that was just naturally what I liked doing. But I didn't know what endurance was. So I started making phone calls. I looked up the American Endurance Riders Conference, which is our national organization that puts on endurance rides around the country. It turns out that they had some in Maine. So within a few weeks, I was at my first endurance ride. And I had put in, it was about 6 weeks, I had started to meet up with people that did endurance all over the state of Maine. And this is the first ride I rode at. It's in Waterford, which I don't know how far that is from you guys, but it's about 2 hours from me. But I had just met up with folks, and they were so welcoming and showed me all the ins and outs of how to ride endurance ride. This was a 30-mile ride, July 4th weekend in 2022. And I had immediately signed up to apply for the Mongol Derby, not knowing if I would get in, but I figured if I was already going to be training with Stevie, that I had a good chance, right? Like, I'm already training for it. I'm already doing my first limited distance ride. Well, the second day after I did my first 30-mile ride on my horse Maggie, I got a call from the equestrianists, and I was like, hey, I just did my first limited distance ride. And they're like, cool, you're in. So I was like, we made that happen. These are some pictures of some of the women I was riding with those first few rides, Lisa Levine and Susie Reinheimer. They taught me a lot about just what to expect at an endurance ride, how to take care of your horse, how to condition a horse for a ride like that. Because a limited distance ride is about 25 to 30 miles. And in the Mongol Derby, you're riding 29, 25-mile rides. So being able to perfect this distance was going to be really important. I also met the folks from Horses Across Maine. They're the ones that put on that ride, and they also do monthly rides, group rides in Oxford, Maine. But in the summer, that same summer, I ended up in Oregon. And the coolest thing about starting to go on a path that feels more in line with what you're supposed to do in life, like kind of tapping into that destiny, is that strange things start to align. So for example, the guy on the left is Bork Schiller, the horse trainer that I'm obsessed with. He was also training for another crazy horse race in Argentina called the Gaucho Derby, which I am now currently training for, because why not, right? But I'm on Chuck Norris there in the middle, and that's Smith Rock in the Bend, Oregon area. And yeah, I just had this feeling like everything is just starting to align, and the way forward is just coming, it's unfurling ahead of me, and I just have to keep going on this path. I realized while I was there that I love Arabians, so I decided, this is Sonic, he's a half Arab, half Appaloosa. That's one of Stevie's horses. So as soon as I got to the airport in Bend, I was on the phone with a woman who had a crazy race brain Arab in the Finger Lakes region of New York, and he would be just the thing that I could train for the Mongol Derby. So he was very cheap because he was very hard to ride, but that was exactly what I needed. When you guys go home, Google the Mongol Derby and you will see horses bucking riders off left and right. This not actually was my experience, but it's definitely something that happens to people, so you want to make sure that you can ride horses that are very hard to ride during this race. I was also advised by some of my other horse friends that I needed to go ride with a cowboy out west. I had never been out west riding before. I had been out west, but never, I'd been to Bend, but I hadn't met any cowboys. I didn't really know they were real. They're totally real. Cowboy culture is alive and well in the American West. So I ended up in Idaho training with Martin Black for the month of November of that year. And that's where I got to put the first rides on some mules, did some colt starting. I was riding some very tall thoroughbred quarter horse crosses that were like 4 years old. The first thing that happened when I got on the first horse there is he immediately bucked me off because I was pulling on his head the way I was taught in my English lessons. It was the English riding, you're kind of pulling on the horse's face. And I learned really quickly that that was not going to work with these Western horses, and it was also not going to work in Mongolia. So it was a great way to learn some new ways of riding that were going to really help me on my journey. I also learned how to ride on terrain that wasn't a trail, because in Maine and anywhere else on the East Coast, when you ride on trails, there's like this tunnel of trees, and you're just kind of like going along the tunnel of trees, and you don't have to really navigate. But in Mongolia, it's just wide open steppe, and there's no trees. So in Idaho, there's very few trees, and it's wide open desert sage scrub. So it's a really good climate to be training in. It also is about 3,500 feet above sea level, so very similar to Mongolia's altitude. So that was really helpful in my training. And then I met up with a former Mongol Derby rider in Maryland who ran an off-the-track thoroughbred adoption program. And so I was learning about how to gallop with this horse named Sinka, because I didn't know this until I started training for the Derby, but Mongolian horses are trained and conditioned to gallop for 12 miles at a time. Now, if you've ridden in the US, you probably haven't spent a lot of time galloping unless you're a jockey. It's not trained, like when you're in riding school, there's no like, let's learn how to gallop day. It's very rare that that's something taught. So I had to learn how to gallop and learn that there are different speeds of gallop, because there's hand gallops and kind of slow gallops. And then there's like the gallop where you come across another racehorse you're on a horse, and then you're in hyper-skied gallop when they're racing each other. And that came in very handy for the race. I also worked on my physical fitness because I hadn't run since high school. I was on the track team, but I definitely didn't run in 20 years. So I got back and was riding with my little Chihuahua Rat Terrier cross, and I was doing about 3 miles. That was about the extent. Maybe I did a 4-mile ride, but that was super helpful to start getting my fitness up, because Stevie said that if you don't have time to ride every day, go running, do lunges, do balance board work on your fitness. It's the difference between having a fun time and having a broken time. And I also went to 3 boot camps over the course of that year. The other women in that picture are training for the Gaucho Derby. And I also needed to do some longer rides, because when we're talking about 1,000 kilometers in 10 days, we're talking about 60 to 75 miles a day. That's a lot of distance on one person. Now that's 3 or 4 horses a day, so the horses aren't working as hard. They still work hard. But I needed to know what it felt like to ride that far. So in the spring of 2023, I went back out to ride with Stevie in some of the races that she had offered. I'm riding Alexander Hamilton. He's a standardbred Arab cross. He's amazing. He's one of the strongest, fastest trots I've ever been on. And I'm riding him in April on the left at the Grizzly Mountain Ride, which is a 75-mile ride in Oregon. And then in May, also in Oregon, I attempted 100. We ended up getting pulled for heart rate at mile 90. So I learned a lot about what happens at a vet check when you don't pulse down in any race other than the Mongol Derby. You're just immediately disqualified, which is good because the horse is telling you that it's tired, so you don't want to keep riding it. But I went 90 miles in a day. definitely ripped like the skin off my legs and learned about what to wear, which was 2 layers of pants, very important. But I wanted to learn that before I was in Mongolia, because that's the difference between being able to finish the race and being pulled, because there's weird bacteria in Mongolia that you're not used to. And so if you rip the skin off of your legs, it could get infected and that'll end your race soon. So I was very grateful that I had an opportunity to do that months ahead of time. I also went to Brave Hearts and got to hang out with the veterans. There were multiple folks that were amputees, folks who had lost children to suicide that were veterans, just people whose lives were super hard, but were remaking themselves on the back of a horse and being able to ride with them for a week. Martin Black, the same trainer that I worked with in Idaho, was giving a clinic there for a week, and I got to ride with them for the week, and it was just amazing. So if you are interested in the kind of work that they're doing, I highly recommend looking them up. They just do amazing work. And they're definitely the gold standard for other equine therapy programs around the country. If you mention Brave Hearts, everyone's like, that's the model. They're amazing. They use like really high quality ex-cutting horses instead of like almost dying dead horses that are old. So it makes for the riding a lot more fun. And I also needed to work on my riding position, because I really wanted to make sure that when I was on a bucking Mongolian horse that I could hold on and not fall. And the number one thing that I learned when I went to this workshop, which was a 3-day rider body biomechanics, galloping, working with different exercises. It was in Ohio, and it was with the trainer that trained Stevie when she was working on training for the Derby. It was a 3-day clinic. It really can be boiled down to just one sentence: lean back. What do rodeo riders do? They lean back. So that was an amazing. It's changed my riding style forever. But it was a wonderful 3 days. Definitely one of the best 3 days I spent training. Right before I left for Mongolia on July 4th weekend, I ended up back at the Firecracker ride. This time I was riding both Maggie on the Saturday and Jelly on the Sunday. We came in first and second, and so that was my first time doing a multi-day ride, because that's another thing you need to do in Mongolia is you gotta not only ride a long ride one day, but you got to go to sleep, get yourself up, camping, and do it again. So I felt like, okay, I've done the long rides, I've done some multi-day rides, I'm ready to go. So the last thing I have to do is pack my stuff. I took over a year to curate all of these things, because on the back of this horse, you have this tiny little saddle bag, and you have your little hydration pack with your water bladder, and then only 5 kilograms of stuff that you are allowed to bring. Luckily, we are eating Mongolian herder family's food, so you don't have to pack food, because you would not have any weight for food and you would die of starvation. But you had things like water purification tablets, electrolytes, 2 changes of clothes, a really extensive med kit with all types of pills that you might need. I had some peanut butter packets. That was like the only snacks I had. Lots of Ziplocs to like put things in that don't get wet, dry bags, contact lenses, all sorts of stuff. But I spent a long time trying to figure out like gear testing, like what's the best pants to wear, what's the best shoes to wear, what's the best everything. And I felt really good by the time I was packing my bags. I was like, this is great. So I got on a plane and flew 12 hours to Turkey and then another 12 hours to Mongolia. And the first thing I did was meet up with my Mongolian language teacher, because for the whole year leading up to the race, I was taking weekly Zoom classes with Ayuna, who lived in Ulaanbaatar. But because of Zoom, one of the wonderful things that came out of the pandemic, right, was that we can now take classes from people in person, but not in person, but like live with a human on the other side of the world. So at 9 p.m. every Wednesday night, I was talking to Ayuna, and it was 9 a.m. where she was. So it was really cool. We went out to dinner and got to hang out. And when I go back to Mongolia, I will definitely hang out with her again. So that was really special. I arrived early because I wanted to, one, get used to that 12-hour time difference, because that took about a week. And I also wanted to go to the academy, because they offer, for an additional fee, which is not nominal, you could go and train with the Mongolian horses and kind of some of the people that work for the race for a whole week before the race started. And I opted for that, because I was like, if I'm going to put this whole year into training, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to do everything I can possibly do so that when I get to that start line, I feel ready. Because my motto has been, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our preparation. And that served me well. First thing I did when I got to the academy and made some friends with some of the other riders was we wanted to try some traditional mare's milk, fermented mare's milk called arug. They don't ride mares in Mongolia, they milk them. And it's an amazing drink. You don't have to use any starter culture to make this fermented drink because the mare's milk is very high in sugar, so it ferments on its own, and it's often fermented in a like a skin sack, but it can also be fermented in a barrel, and I've seen it both ways, and you have to churn it thousands of times. But it was actually delicious. It's slightly alcoholic, but you can't really drink too much of it because it'll come out the other end really fast, and it's like milky, so it's not like you're gonna get drunk on it, but it is kind of like kefir. It's delicious, but it's also very like eclectic taste. I was terrified the first time I got on a Mongolian horse because I was like, are they gonna just dump me? And I just spent 1.5 years working on training, and I'm gonna get dumped in the academy training and not even get to the start line, because that's happened. That's definitely happened to other people, and I was like definitely scared that this could be a thing. But as soon as I got on those Mongolian horses and didn't die, it was only a matter of time where I was just like, I'm ready. And I was enjoying myself galloping on these great steeds. Now, Mongolian horses are only 11 to 13 hands tall, so that means that they're really small. So they're
Kind of a pony.
Yeah, they're kind of like a pony, but you never call them a pony. You got to call them a horse, otherwise people get very, just like Icelandic horses. Don't call them ponies. So they bust all 43 riders out to the steppe after the academy was over, and we get off on this coach, and all of the staff are like waiting for us, and there's this beautiful ceremony with milk, because milk is sacred in Mongolia. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to go to Mongolia is because they milk 7 different species of animals, and I milked 3 at home. So I wanted to kind of connect with a culture that was not only in love with horses, but also in love with dairy and sheep and goats and all things milk. So the first thing they do is you take a milk offering and offer it up to the sky god, Tenger. They still practice shamanic culture in Mongolia. They also practice Lamist Buddhism as well. And the blue, it's like a sacred blue scarf called a hadag, and you'll see that a lot in all the houses, or gers, the yurts that they live in. And then I got to meet some of the amazing crew members. Tommy was one of them. He was one of the interpreters. I learned through him, this is so funny, small world thing, that in Arlington, Virginia, which is where I'm from, has the largest population of Mongolians outside of Mongolia, and he had grown up in that same town that I was from. So here I am on the steppe, and he's just like, oh yeah, I grew up in Roslyn. I was like, what? Like, how is it even possible? But it is, and he's actually in Roslyn right now, and he was like, hey, let's hang out. And I'm like, oh man, I'm in Maine right now, but how cool would that be? And the start camp was expansive. There was all of these gers lined up. It was like 20 or 30 gers, which is the Mongolian yurt. And then there's big banquet hall, and it was beautifully catered. It was a really beautiful site. Lots of beautiful mountains all around. This was all of the riders before they got very tired and some injured. And we did a few more training rides, but by this time I was ready. I wasn't scared anymore, and I was just enjoying. One of the things that people told me about the Mongolian horses before I went to Mongolia is that they're not like normal horses. You can't snuggle them. They're not friendly. They're gonna hate you. They're not used to Westerners. You're gonna smell like a weirdo to them, and they're not used to your smell. But you know what? They're same as horses. If you find the spots that are itchy on them and scratch them, they will be your friends. And so I found the scratchy spots on almost, like there was maybe like 2 horses that wanted nothing to do with me, but out of the 40 horses I rode while I was in Mongolia, they were mostly just like any other horse that I had met. So that was pretty cool. This is what the race looked like on a map. It started about 8 hours west of Ulaanbaatar and ended about 6 hours east of Ulaanbaatar. And each of these little dots is a horse station. And we all had trackers on our bodies that were clipped to us that were Garmin InReaches. And so they connected to a database that had everybody's location. So people at home could be online looking at our dot the whole race, which is pretty cool. So people back home sometimes knew more about the race than I did because I couldn't see where everyone else was. I was just in the middle of the steppe, but everyone else was just like, commenting and, what is going on. They give us maps that look like this, topo maps, and the little red dots are the different horse stations, and you can see there's like water and mountains, and you have to decide when you're looking at this, this is all programmed into your GPS, and you've got this little pink line. And the pink line doesn't actually work unless you're moving, so you have to be moving on the horse that maybe is galloping in the wrong direction for a while, and then you just have to hope that you go in the right direction. Little thing that I learned along the way is that if your horse is slow, just go straight. You can go over the mountain, just go straight there as long as the mountain's not too big. If your horse is fast, go on the road around, and you'll make up lots of time. But of course, I took pictures of all these maps before we left because they said we couldn't put them in our rider weight because it would count as rider weight. So that didn't turn out to work out for me because my phone died right away as soon as I started the race. But these were really nice maps. I have copies of them still, but I didn't really look at them as closely as I should have during the race. That's what the maps look like when they put them all together. It kind of looks like a mustache. And the night before the race, they blessed our bridles. Everyone had their own bridles, and they gave us all saddles and saddle pads that we could bring with us. So as you change horses, you would bring your tack with you from horse to horse. So you would use the same tack the whole time. And the saddles were specially made for Mongolian horses from a South African endurance company called Franco C. And so they were endurance saddles that were specifically very small for the Mongolian horse. But they were kind of comfortable. I like riding them. There was also a bunch of cultural events. So if you've never heard Mongolian music, please look it up on YouTube. They have an instrument called the morenkor, which is the 2-string horsehead fiddle. And it makes sounds that mimic the sounds of the steppe, which includes the sound of horses moving on the steppe. And it is just lovely. They also had traditional throat singers, Mongolian long song, and a couple other stringed instruments. They also are really well known for their contortionists, which I didn't know until I was there. So that was pretty cool. The night before the Derby started, we got stuck in a rainstorm and everybody's stuff got wet. And they put a wood stove in one of the gears and everybody was checking like every few minutes, like, is my stuff dry? Because we came all the way across the world to have our stuff soaked before we started this race. But it was a full moon, so even though our stuff was drying, it was feeling like this is an amazing night. And I think we're ready. So the day of the race came and everybody lines up to weigh their stuff and make sure that you're not a gram over 5 kilograms because they're going to make you take stuff out of your bag. Then they would send us down in groups of 5 down to the horse line. So 43 riders, groups of 5 at a time. So those first groups of 5 would have to be on their horse waiting for the next many groups of 5 to get on their horses to the start line, which is uphill. So it's a downhill start, which I don't understand why they did that. I feel like they're like trying to make us fall in the beginning. But yeah, these are the horse lines. They would make us draw a number out of a little jar, and that would be the horse. The horse would correspond with a number. So on the butt of this horse said number 11, and I had drawn number 11. And what was cool is I had learned enough Mongolian that I could say Arontao and say, oh, I got number 11. So they wouldn't need an interpreter to tell the herder which number I got, which was like my best Mongolian was numbers. But I got this beautiful chestnut, and I'm terrified at this point because I'm like, oh my God, I've been visualizing this day for 1.5 years, and I'm going to do a downhill start. And you can see that when they counted back from 10 and we started and everybody starts galloping, you can see I'm leaning back. I've got my training and I'm terrified and I'm pulling on that horse. But within a few minutes, you can see we've got a loose rein again and I'm chilling and I'm good. And within a few minutes after that, there's a herd of sheep and goats behind me and I'm just galloping across this landscape. And all the riders are kind of starting to spread out and we're there, we're in it. And man, it was awesome. This is the only photo I took the entire race, so I'm very grateful that there are amazing photographers that are hired by the race, and I will credit them at the end, because if it was me, this would be the end of the presentation, because that would be the only photo that I'd be able to show you. But luckily, that is not so, so I can show you a lot of cool ones. When we got into horse station 1, it was a madhouse because all of the riders are coming in at the same time because things haven't really spread out as much as they were going to. And I knew that this was going to be like this because I'd done a lot of research. And so I didn't fill my water bag. I didn't get lunch. I just drew the next horse and I went. And what was cool about the next horse I got was I got this really cool Nadam horse. Nadam is Mongolian racing. These are the horses that are conditioned to gallop for 12 miles without stopping. And when I got on him, we flew. I originally rode out with another rider. And we were like, oh yeah, we're gonna ride out together. But I left her in the dust like really early on. And then this is where I learned about that kind of hyperspeed gallop because another Nadam horse came up alongside me. And as soon as we were side by side, we flew. I ended up riding with a couple other riders that day. Segue, before I talk about the rest of that day, I want to tell you how happy these herders are that we get to ride their horses. When we give them back at the end of the ride, they ask you for like, how was the horse? You give like some feedback. And then this guy's like, yeah, you knew you just rode that awesome horse of mine. And even though my English and his Mongolian were not really communicating super well, I could just tell that he was like, yeah, you know that horse was awesome, and I knew that horse was awesome. And so I feel like it kind of translated language, and that was one of the best parts, was being able to see the herders like they're so excited that you're riding your horse. And sometimes you would even see herders driving in their cars alongside their prized horse that was being ridden in the race, because it was just an honor, you know, that and sometimes the horses would have like ribbons in their hair because they had won a bunch of awards, because sometimes you get the prized racehorse, sometimes you get the child's pony, sometimes you get a horse that they don't ride very often or any at all, and sometimes you get a horse that's really fast. Some of the horses are the horse that they ride every day, so they're super well trained. It's just, you don't know. It's just a number that you just hope that's a good one. But one thing I didn't tell you about the race is that in addition to choose your own adventure on the route, it's choose your own adventure where you sleep. So there are horse stations, and if you are lucky that at 7 p.m. when the riding hours are over that you are near one, you can sleep at the horse station, and there's catered food. It's Mongolian food, and there's a family that's expecting you, and they're very happy to take your horse, and you give the horse back to the owner, and then you can just like focus on putting your sleeping stuff together and like passing out from riding for 65 miles. But most of the time you are not near a horse station, and you are in the middle of the steppe, which means that you are going to go knock on somebody's door. In this case, we're at a water hole saying, man, who's got a ger nearby? But we spot a ger in the distance, and we talked to this family, and they said we could stay there. So basically, steppe hospitality in this region of the world is such that you can literally walk up to anywhere and ask if you can stay the night, and it is almost always they're going to say yes, unless there's extenuating circumstance like the man of the house isn't home or something like that. But it's the Mongolian culture, and we were actually instructed not to offer them money because they didn't want to erode that feature of it. And it was really awesome because you got to get to know people. They didn't always know about the Mongol Derby, so they'd be like, why do you want to ride horses that far? You know, we would end up being able to get on the phone with like their relative in Ulaanbaatar, because they have cell phone service out there, that they would be able to translate for us, and they'd be like, why are you even doing this? We're like, because it's fun. Because like they don't ride that far anymore. They've got motorcycles and cars. You know, they still herd horses and herd animals with horses, but they think it's kind of funny that we're out there. But sometimes they've never heard of the Mongol Derby because they're nomadic. Every year they're in a different place. So and the race changes course every year. So they don't always know like what you're doing there. So it's kind of fun to explain. You show up on someone's doorstep and you're like, hey, can I stay? And what's cool is they usually say yes, and then you graze your horse for an hour, make sure the horse gets a nice full belly, give him some water, and they'll help you put the horse on a horse line so he's nice and secure for the night. Because if you don't have a horse line, like sometimes people would camp in goat sheds or like little makeshift shelters that they would just find out there, but you have to tie the horse yourself and not lose it, which is easier said than done. And not always would people have their horse in the morning when they would camp. But we were lucky on that first night, and we had a photographer with us. So all of these pictures at the beginning, there's so many of them because there was a photographer embedded. But the rest of the race is really disjointed because it was kind of like where they would see us at random times, because, you know, we're out in the middle of the steppe riding, and so there's no one there to document a lot of it. But these beautiful outfits are called dels, and this is the traditional Mongolian garb. The guy on the left is the driver, and I thought he was related to the family for a long time. I would see the drivers just walking into a house or into a ger and just sit down and start eating. But then I realized that that's just how Mongolians do. So when you walk into a stranger's house that you've never met before, it is completely cool to just sit down and start eating their food. That they expect you to do that. And there's no like moment where you notice them being like, oh, is it cool if I eat this? They just start eating. And it's like as if, and so I thought they were like family members, but they didn't even know each other. And they gave us a big bowl of boiled sheep parts. And as a sheep and goat farmers, I was like, I'm going to be fine with the food because I eat sheep and goat meat all the time. But even me, someone who's a pretty adventurous eater, I was challenged by the food because it was different connective tissue, different cuts, lots of organ meats. This night we were eating sheep face, and it was a lot to stomach. But I smiled and said thank you. But
You were eating what?
it was the face of a sheep. Yeah. That's what they eat there. And so I said, you know, you can see my face. I'm trying. But it was even hard for me. There was definitely some struggles, but we were always able to eat enough to get enough sustenance to move to the next horse station. But some meals were better than others. A lot of people got food poisoning, and especially if you didn't use your water purification tablets correctly. I always waited the half hour. I had made sure I had a watch that would have power the whole time so that I could time my water purification tablets, and I never did get sick. I did have charcoal tabs and like a Z-Pack in case something came up, but didn't need to use it. That first night had the best sunset ever. And what I love about that's the family as well. But what I love about the photographer is she brought a Polaroid camera, and so she would do portraits of the families that she was photographing, and they always have altars at the back of their gear, and so she would give them a photograph that they could keep. So I thought it was really beautiful. Day 2, I don't have any photos of, but I tell you, I did ride a bunch of horses, and it was a nice long day. This is coming in. I camped out in a swamp with this little beautiful guy. It was actually the only house I stayed at. It was like a rectangular house instead of a ger, but it was still a family of Mongolian herders. And this guy, I was trying to pass another rider as I came into this mountainous horse station at Horse Station 5, and I was trying to pass this other rider, and I should have been walking my horse more because it was hot. And at the end of your like 29-mile or 25-mile ride, you start to walk your horse a couple kilometers before you get to the station so that the heart rate will come down. And I wasn't walking my horse in as well as I should have. And I ended up, when the vet came and checked my horse, because they're always checking the heart rate, they're checking for make sure it's not sore, if they have any marks on their bit or on their girth. He came in 2 beats above 56, so he was at 58 for the half hour. So I ended up getting my first penalty. And that meant I got a nice long breakfast. I hadn't had dinner or breakfast since I got there, so I was pretty psyched that I got to go in this ger and check out what they had. The inside of the gers are gorgeous. There's another rider named Phoebe, but they would have, at these horse stations, there would be like fried meat patties called horse shore, and sometimes they'd have steamed dumplings, and they would have little soups or mutton soups or little noodles. So there's all sorts of food that they would have at the horse station. So that was great, because when you camp out, you know, you might have just sheep face, and it's a little bit hard to get as full as you would want to be. But I always filled my water bladder and made sure I used my purification tablets. There's me eating some horse shore. I put this photo in just to remind people that these horses do have some moments. Sometimes I would pull a horse off the line and it would be bucking and moving around kind of crazy. And the herder would usually offer to get on the horse and ride it around the horse line first. And usually after the herder rode it around in a circle, the horse would calm down. Part of it is that you're using Western stirrups that they've never seen before. You're using a saddlebag that they've never seen before. So the horses are scared of your tack. They're scared of your helmet. They're scared of how you smell and how you look. And so every horse I would just approach and just be really calm and just breathe. And my little superpower is that I like every horse I ride. If you ask me who my favorite horse is, it's going to be the one that I'm on. And I think the horses can really feel that. And it worked for me. I never ended up having a horse that did any crazy bucking when I was on its back. I had pretty much, like, compared to some of the other riders, my Derby was quite boring. There was 11 hospitalizations of the riders during this race, and I was really lucky I wasn't one of those. This guy was so cute. He was a pacer, so he had a different type of gait than most horses, because there's so much genetic diversity in these Mongolian horses. Like, you might notice they have come in every color, and it's because their gene pool is like the proto horse. So some of the horses are gated, which just means they have a different styles of speeds that they can do, different beats. I don't know a lot about gated horses, but this one definitely paced, so it kind of moved its. Yeah, it moved.
Standard bred usually.
Yeah, like a standard bred, but the Mongolian, some of them pace, some of them tolt.
You had an Appaloosa, and I'm thinking, where's that gene pool come from?
I think it's the original gene pool. They have it all. Yeah, because the horses came from that region, domesticated ones anyways, and that's where they would have moved out from. So it's pretty cool. There were things like rivers to cross and I don't know, this one I crossed like 6 times because I can't read a map very good. Coming into horse station 8 on day 3, the end of the day, I had this beautiful Grula horse. Grula is like a dark dun. They have like, they're like gray with like dorsal stripes down their back. And then they have these little like zebra markings on their butts, which are really cute. There was a bunch of crew members that would be like doing social media. So like these folks are like tweeting and like posting on Facebook about the race from like a water tank where we're like trying to cool our horses down because they're hot. At any given time, there were 3 medics in these little like Lexus Land Rover things. So within half an hour, if you hit your SOS button, they'd be there to help you. I luckily never had to call them, but we did have an amazing crew of medics there. One of the reasons I didn't get sick is as a cheesemaker, I know how important sanitation is. And basically, if you know anything about cheesemaking, you're basically a glorified dishwasher. So I would wash my hands and I didn't get sick. So there's these really atrocious long drop toilets, or sometimes just the step toilet. Biodegradable wet wipes was very important. But they had these little hand wash stations set up at the horse stations, and I used them anytime I saw one. So that's one of the reasons why I think I stayed pretty healthy. And yeah, a lot of the rides, it's just, I don't even remember some of the horses. It's just, I got on a horse and then I rode 25 miles and then I put my horse away and I got another horse and rode another 25 miles and then I put them away. So that was a lot of days. This is horse station 10. I remember this one because it was a Palomino, and when I was a kid, I had a Palomino. Palomino is just a golden horse with a white mane and tail. It was a really hot day. We ended up walking about 10 kilometers on that one. If it was 5 p.m. or earlier, when we got to the last horse station of the day, we would ride out. This day we rode out, I don't have any pictures of it, but we rode out in a rainstorm, and the guy I was riding out with, we were going to go camping, like find a place to stay for the night together. And he stopped. He was like, I want to put my rain jacket on because it's starting to pour. And I was like, these horses are really fresh. I don't think it's a good idea to stop them yet. They haven't, like, when you first get on a horse, they have a lot of energy, and you kind of want to let them run it out before you ask them to do things like stop. And so I stopped, but I didn't get off my horse. He got off his horse, and his horse promptly left him for the last horse station. And so he had to go back and walk and find another horse. So I didn't see him again for a while. And I was a little bit worried because I was now by myself in a rainstorm, and I was about to find a place to camp. And I start, galloping on in the direction I was headed. And, I was kind of feeling like, oh man, I got to go talk to someone by myself because I hadn't done that yet. But a few minutes later, another rider comes running up, and it's this woman, Lucy, this woman in the purple pants. And she was like, hey, let's find a place to camp. So we found a family in the swamp that had puppies and kids, and they put our horses on a horse line. And then we got to watch the mom milk the cows and like help herd them in. And so it was just a beautiful night, and like the sun had come out and there was like rainbows, and we're just in this like low wetland swamp. And then we go in and they're playing the ankle bone game. So we got to play the traditional Mongolian game where they just basically save the ankle bones from lots of sheep and goats, and then it's like dice, but they're ankle bones. It's really cool. And we got to learn about that game, and we were like using Google Translate on her phone because her phone wasn't dead to try to like explain why we were doing what we're doing. And at the end of the night, there was like these little toads underneath their stove, and the family kept like looking at the toads and pointing and laughing. And so I remember that as staying in the swamp with stove toads. But look at that. That was a beautiful strawberry roan Appaloosa that I was on that day. But yeah, get to another vet check, vet down, pick another horse, pick another number, head to another chestnut. Chestnuts are my favorite. I have 3 chestnuts at home. More horse shore. This horse station had hot sauce. There was one that had ham sushi. I remember the ones that were different because it was mostly just the same thing every day. This was my favorite horse, another Grula. This is horse station 15. And what's special about horse station 15 is that the owner of this station, the herder, his name is Erdine. It's this guy. He was actually the winner of the Mongol Derby in 2022, the August edition. He ended up winning a competition where he got a free entry to the race. And of course, being a Mongolian herder, he won. But what's really cool is that the next year he signs up to be a host. And he loves that race so much that he was so excited to be lending his horses to us. And when I got to that station, I was, at this point, this is halfway through the race, this is horse station 14, and I'm about number 5 in the race. And so when I get there, one of the race organizers was like, oh my God, Erdine's so nervous about hosting. He's hoping that his place looks nice for everybody. And just to hear that side of it, that this guy, he's not only he knows everything about this race because he's ridden it, he's also hosting it, knowing what we're going to do. And that just felt like so awesome and so gratifying to be like, he is so into this. They also flew him to Argentina to ride with the gauchos the following year, which there's a video about that online, and it is phenomenal, of just like the cultural exchange between the gauchos and the Mongolian herders and learning how to ride in a different way. Anyways, Erdine's awesome. The horse that I rode of his was so strong. He had a GPS collar. I don't know why. But it was kind of a funny story with him. I rode out with a bunch of Pakistani riders because there was 4 Pakistani doctors that were also in the race. And they do this really cool like gallop and then walk kind of style ride. And we went out, and then all of a sudden in the mountains, like they went a different way. And I was in the middle of a grassland and no one else. And it's like an hour before riding hours are over. And you're not allowed to ride past riding hours. You get a penalty if you ride too much past the riding hours. And a rain store is coming in. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get off my horse and try to put my rain jacket on because we know what happens then. So I'm like, this horse is calmed down. We've done our little gallop out. He's like trotting real nice, strong trot. So I'm like trying to reach in my backpack to be like, can I put this rain jacket on while I'm on the horse? Turns out I couldn't, and I came off the horse. It wasn't like a buck. It was just like he kind of moved and I was off. But I was holding the lead rope and I did not lose him. But I'm in a sea of grass. There's literally nothing anywhere for miles and miles. And so I message HQ and I'm like, I came off my horse, I'm fine, but I'm not going to make it to anything that looks like a good place to camp or a gare or a horse station or anything, which is a bummer because I could have totally made it to the next horse station if I hadn't come off the horse. But we're walking, so we're not moving it anywhere fast. So 7 o'clock rolls around, and so I park where I am, which is in grass, just stubby little grass and hills, nothing in the distance. And I put the hobbles on him so he can graze, took off his saddle. I had some horse shore that I'd stuck in my pocket from the last horse station. And I'm sitting on the grass. And, I think one of my biggest fears in the past had been like, I would have never want to camp alone. That sounds terrifying. But I wasn't terrified. I was there with my horse and we were fine. And I was like, you know what? I can totally stay like this. Vet comes, checks me out, and was like, your horse is fine, but you don't have any water. You can't camp here. So she helps me get back on the horse, and I ride another half hour because I couldn't really get back on him myself because he was so jumpy. But when she held him, I could get on him fine. But when you're in the middle of a sea of grass by yourself, there's just like nothing you can do. So she helped me find a gare. I got to settle the horse down for the night. But when I got to the next horse station the next day, I had another 2-hour penalty because I had help when I was camping, so you're not allowed to have help. So I got a nice long breakfast since I had missed, all I had was that like leftover horse shore in my pocket. So I had a nice long breakfast and I watched all the other riders come in. So I lost my lead, which was a bummer. But I got on this nice horse and then we proceeded to get very lost in the mountains and lose more of our lead. But it was cool. Rode some more chestnuts that day, drank some more sute cha, which is salty milk tea, ate some more horse shore. Watched some other riders plan their routes on maps, and I was like, I just follow the pink line at this point. I don't understand maps, which I need to get better at for Patagonia. Lots more cool chestnuts. This one would spook at flowers. There was this one like alpine part where there were some trees. They have tamarack trees in Mongolia. And there was like these little lupin flowers and edelweiss. And every time the horse saw them, he would kind of like jump. But that was the only spooky horse. Most of the horses there aren't spooky, which is weird. So if you ride spooky Arabs like I had, these guys are kind of a piece of cake compared to it. I rode this guy. He was trained to rear, and one of the photographers had ridden him in the race the year before, and she said, don't ask him to rear because he will. Don't give him the cue. It turned out, though, that he was the child's of the herder's favorite kids pony, and they were like hanging on him and hugging him and loving on him, and I was like, don't worry, I will bring your horse back in one piece. He was so small, so I decided to walk a lot of the way because I didn't want to squish him. I want to make sure those kids had their favorite pony back, and they did. He had like blue eyes. He was so cute, but he was so small. He was like the smallest one I rode. But they're still strong. But he was a slow trotter. That was a slow leg. Coming into horse station 20 at the end of day 7, I'm on this one that has one blue eye and one brown eye, and it's a hot day, so we're like stopping to drink water a bunch. But when I gave him back to his herders, to the herding family, I actually started crying giving him back. Like when we had been in the swamp by ourselves, I was like singing songs. I was singing Christmas songs to myself because that's just what came up in my mind. Like Here Comes Santa Claus for like hours, just me and him, and like I was just like so emotional. I think it's just because you're like using your body in this really extreme way that you're like kind of losing your mind by this point. So I'm like really emotionally attached to that horse. He was great. And then, you know, another day, another horse station, that person's like, go this way. And then there's the story of the stallion. This is my last little story before we come to the finish line. I had never ridden a stallion before, because like who rides stallions? Like professionals, right? And I'm just like a backyard rider. So I pull a stallion. You know he's a stallion because he's got a mane. All of the horses in the race are geldings, except for ones with big flowy manes. Those are stallions. And this guy, he was like super small though. He was a little weak sauce stallion. So we come out of the station and I'm trying to put him into a canter, and he's just like on his front legs, like can't canter with a person on his back like he's never has. And he was real slow. And so every other rider passed us over this like 6-hour period. And it was one of those, it was a really hard leg. So it was the only one in the whole race where there was a town that you had to go through. And at the end of the town, there was also a compulsory bridge. And when we got to the town, the horse was just looking around like freaked out, like there's no way I'm going to go through this town. And so I had to like kind of drag him through the town. And then we get to the bridge and the horse is like, I'm not going across this bridge. And I am like stuck. And I know I'm like hours behind everyone at this point, and I'm hot and I'm hungry. And I was like, I had been dreaming about like maybe I could get like chips and beer at the store in town, but I chickened out because I was like, I don't want to like get disqualified from the race because I'm this late. And there's an interpreter on the other end of the bridge, and he's like watching me for like a long time as I'm like not moving. And like eventually, seeming like it ages later, he was like taking pity on me, and he helped me like pull my pony across. It was like a pony ride. He was like, he had the lead rope and he was walking, and I was like sitting, and I was like, this is so embarrassing. And somewhere there's a picture on the internet of this, and to my shame and horror. So I come into this horse station and I'm like dead last. And I go into the gare that has the food, and all of the food is gone. And I'm like, I just burst out in tears. And there's like this 18-year-old interpreter like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. And I like took a deep breath. And I was like, because all of the folks that had gotten injured in the blood wagon, it's a little van that follows the race, had like come through and cleaned out all the food before I got in there. I was so mad at them. But I go out to the horse line and I'm like, all right, I've got to get on another horse. They're going to close this station down. I better go. And I pick number 27, and the vet is like, you know, looks at the herder, and the herder's like, 27's no good. Can't take 27. And Angus is like, okay, that's the vet. And so I pick number 32. And the herder looks at Angus and I was like, 32 is no good. You want number 5. And so what had happened is this guy's been waiting all day for someone to pick number 5, which is his like prize racehorse. And no one's picked it. I'm the last one through. So I'm the last person of this race that's going to be able to pick this horse. And Angus is like, this is not how it works. You can't just like have number 5. And he's like, fine, draw another one. And the guy's like, okay. Number 28 sounds like 5. And so he let me get on this amazing Nottingham racehorse, and we basically galloped the whole race, the whole ride, this 25-mile ride. It was like a flat desert, and there was like nothing. It was just like scrubby little tiny grass and marmot holes. But by this point, it was day 8, and I didn't care about marmot holes. All I knew is that these horses have been living on the steppe for their entire lives, and they knew how to run past marmot holes. So all I had to do was lean back and get out of the horse's way, and we just went forward. And we actually ended up passing a bunch of other riders, and we were not last anymore. And there was this moment where I heard this like kind of snap on my right stirrup, and my right stirrup had totally snapped on one side. But this is the middle of this gallop. But I didn't care because it was day 8, and I was galloping on this amazing horse, and I was just like, whatever, I'm just going to keep really good form. I'm going to stay balanced, and I'm not going to die. And I got into the next station. You can see here I found some rope from a herder, and I just like tied up that side of the stirrup, and I was like, we're going to carry on because we got 2 more days to go. And day 9 was awesome. I did 4 stations that day because it was overcast, so we were able to move quite quickly. Got to make up some time, started getting back up in the mid-pack again. And at one point, I'm by myself, and it's misty, and a herd of 2-hump camels appears. And there's like 30 camels, there's babies. There's not very many wild herds of camels in that part of Mongolia. And I just like ride through it. And the coolest part is like, you know, if you're on an American horse and they saw a herd of camels, they'd probably lose their mind and spook, and they wouldn't go through it. But he's just like trotting through, and there's just camels everywhere. It's just it was one of those beautiful days. There's lots of wildlife that we saw, but that was definitely the coolest. day 10, wake up, get ready to go, and had a really nice first leg. And the second leg, I pulled this beautiful chestnut that galloped me right into the finish line. And I was able to meet up with Reed, who was one of the riders I rode with on the first day. He was actually a veteran from the Afghan War, and he rode that entire race without one of his legs. And he was a better rider than a lot of people. He was in a lot of pain at the end, but he was amazing. And it was an honor to come in with him. And we were able to canter in on the finish line, which was really fun. But look at this cute little guy. He was great. And they vetted out great. They gave us a little hadog. They gave us all a Dell so we could party hardy in Mongolian fashion. And you can see some folks have some like casts on and with some broken things. But for the most part, everybody's okay. Nobody died. And I always want to thank the photographers, Kathy Gabriel and Sherry Thompson. If they hadn't been out there on the step, this would be a much more boring presentation. And just real quick, I'm just going to zoom through some photos of the northern region of Mongolia, because while I was there, I had to take full advantage of being in Mongolia. And I went up to the north where they have the Darkhan people and the white horses that they are famous for. They're a little bit larger. And I got to meet up with this female horse herder, and they led us up. Not only was she an amazing dairy woman, and I got to learn a lot about cheese, but they led us up to the reindeer people, the Satsin, that live near the Russian border. It was a 2-day trek on horseback, which was absolutely gorgeous, and we got to meet the reindeer herders. They live in orts, which is like a ger, but it is a teepee, and they're made out of poles and a teepee material because they have to fit them on reindeer instead of horses, so they have to be lighter. But they have the same cultural significance as a ger. But they literally ride and herd reindeer there. And it was one of the most, I got to butcher a reindeer as a meat and dairy farmer. It's a skill that I had, so I really enjoyed. I actually gave my knife to one of the herders because he really liked it. So I thought that was cool. Definitely know what to bring the herders for gifts next time. Best Christmas card ever, basically. And then basically I realized I came back and, we won Best in Show in the Maine Cheese Festival in September, because I came back in end of August, and I felt hollow inside. I was just like, I just want to do this. So I ended up in South Africa in the winter racing with some friends I had met. And here's some just cool photos. Now I am continuing to fundraise for Brave Hearts. I've got some postcards I will pass out to you guys. But I'm working on my next adventure now. So I am training for a 500-kilometer race in Patagonia. It will commence in February of 2026. I'm headed down to Patagonia for my first training January 12th of this year. So this will be the next phase of the adventure. Meanwhile, this summer I sold Fuzzy Udder Creamery because I just didn't feel like making cheese anymore when I had this other stuff I wanted to do. And I've started my own training program. So I have clients, I do some horse training and some lessons, and take people on trail rides, and just building up my own little horse thing here in Maine, and hoping to continue to race all over the world. Thank you guys for coming. Happy to answer questions, and I'll give you guys some postcards in a sec.
Actually, 2 questions.
Yeah.